The dinner party was a masterpiece of porcelain and pretense, the kind of evening where the wine is vintage, but the smiles are cheap. Lucas watched his wife across the candlelight, noticing how her hand lingered on another man's sleeve a second too long. A touch too familiar for a colleague, too intimate for a friend. It wasn't the laughter that gave it away, but the silence that fell between them whenever he looked their way. If you know that sinking feeling when the person you love becomes a stranger right in front of your eyes, stay with me because the truth is about to break the surface. The relentless hum of the server room fans was the only lullaby Lucas had known for 6 months. It was 4 a.m. when he finally clocked out of the warehouse logistics center, his eyes burning from hours of staring at shipping manifests. He wasn't Lucas Thorne, the Wolf of Wall Street prodigy anymore. He was just employee number 492, a ghost in a high-visibility vest. He took the subway home, the car empty save for a sleeping nurse and a drunk student. The rhythmic clatter of the tracks sounded like coins dropping into a tin cup, a sound that mocked him. When he unlocked the door to their basement apartment in Queens, the air was stale. It smelled of damp drywall and expensive perfume. Chanel No. 5. The bottle Evelyn had bought last week, claiming it was essential for her image. Lucas moved quietly, not wanting to wake her, but the bedroom lamp was still on. Evelyn was sitting at the small vanity table, squeezed into the corner of the room. She wasn't sleeping. She was on her phone, typing furiously, a small, secretive smile playing on her lips, the kind of smile she used to give him when he surprised her with tickets to Paris. "You're up early," Lucas said, his voice raspy from disuse. Evelyn jumped, hastily locking her screen and placing the phone face down. The smile vanished, replaced instantly by a mask of weary annoyance. "I couldn't sleep," she said, not turning to look at him. "The neighbors were fighting again, and the heating is making that clicking sound." Lucas took off his coat, hanging it carefully. It was cheap polyester, but he treated it with the respect of a bespoke suit. "I'll look at the radiator tomorrow. I can try to bleed the valve again." "Don't bother," Evelyn sighed, finally standing up. She was wearing a silk robe that belonged to her old life, the fabric shimmering incongruously against the peeling wallpaper. "You'll just make it worse, Lucas. Like the sink. Like the car." The words were soft, but they landed like darts. Lucas paused, his back to her. "I'm doing my best, Evie. The overtime pay comes in next week. We can clear the credit card minimum." "The minimum?" she repeated, a hollow laugh escaping her throat. "We used to talk about investment portfolios, Lucas. Now we talk about minimums. Do you know how humiliating it is? Going to work, smiling at clients who wear jewelry worth more than this entire building, and then coming back to this? It's temporary," he said, the same mantra he'd repeated for a year. "I just need one break, one firm to look past the lawsuit." "It's been 2 years," Evelyn said coldly. She walked past him to the bathroom, brushing against his arm. She flinched, ever so slightly, as if his poverty was contagious. "I have a gala tonight, the winter charity ball. I'll be late. Need a ride? I can borrow the van from work." "No," she cut him off sharply. "I'll take a cab. Or," Marcus offered to send a car for the team. "It's better for optics." Marcus. The name hung in the air. Marcus Hale, her biggest client. The man whose name had been popping up in her stories far too often lately. "Right?" Lucas said, swallowing the bitter taste of suspicion. "Optics." Evelyn closed the bathroom door. The lock clicked. A second later, the faint sound of a notification pinged from inside. Lucas stood alone in the dim bedroom. He looked at her phone, which she had forgotten on the vanity. It buzzed again. He knew the passcode, her birthday, or at least it used to be. He took a step toward it, his hand trembling. He was a man who used to analyze risk for a living, who could spot a bad deal from a mile away. But right now, looking at that glowing screen, he wasn't sure he could afford to know the truth. The cost of knowing might be the only thing he had left. His ignorance. He stopped, withdrew his hand, and turned away. Not yet. He wasn't ready to crash just yet. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It only exposed the dust motes dancing in the stale air of the apartment. Evelyn had left an hour ago, a flurry of nerves and expensive fabric, leaving behind the scent of her perfume and a silence that felt heavy, like a gathering storm. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, his laptop humming in front of him. He wasn't supposed to have access to the joint account anymore. Evelyn had changed the password 3 months ago, claiming it was for security reasons after the bankruptcy. But Lucas was a man who used to build algorithms that outsmarted the global market. Guessing a password based on Evelyn's predictable patterns, a combination of her mother's maiden name and her graduation year, took him less than 5 minutes. He hit enter. The screen refreshed, populating rows of data. He scrolled through the ledger, his eyes scanning the numbers with the detached precision of an auditor looking for a discrepancy. Rent, utilities, groceries, meager amounts at discount stores. Then he stopped. 3 days ago, a withdrawal for $1,000. Lucas stared at the line item. That money was the emergency fund. It was the cash he had scraped together from overtime shifts, selling his college textbooks, and pawning his father's cufflinks. It was meant for the impending tax lien, the only thing keeping them from total destitution. He clicked on the transaction details. It wasn't a bill payment. It was a transfer to a debit card, followed immediately by a purchase at Voucher & Co., a high-end watch boutique on Fifth Avenue. His chest didn't heave. He didn't slam the laptop shut. Instead, a cold, numbing sensation spread from his fingertips up his arms. In the world of finance, numbers were the only truth. People lied, markets fluctuated, but the ledger always balanced eventually. And right now, the ledger was telling him that his wife had liquidated their survival for a gift. He needed visual confirmation. The data was the smoke. He needed to see the fire. 2 hours later, Lucas stood on the corner of 64th and Lexington, the collar of his cheap coat turned up against the biting wind. He blended into the shadows of the street, invisible to the wealthy patrons stepping out of limousines in front of the Pierre. He saw her. Evelyn was standing near the entrance, but she wasn't alone. She was with Marcus Hale. The real estate mogul looked every inch the Titan Lucas used to aspire to be. Impeccable suit, confident stance, a man who owned the pavement he stood on. They weren't acting like client and publicist. There was no professional distance. Evelyn was leaning in close, her hand resting on Marcus's forearm, her fingers tracing the fabric of his sleeve. She laughed at something he said, throwing her head back, exposing the long line of her throat. It was a laugh Lucas hadn't heard in years, light, unburdened, adoring. Then Marcus moved. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a possessive, familiar gesture that guided her toward the revolving doors. Before they entered, Marcus paused and adjusted his cuff. On his wrist sat a brand new Voucher timepiece, the platinum casing catching the streetlights. Evelyn looked at the watch, then up at Marcus, her eyes shining with a pride that gutted Lucas more than any insult could. She looked at Marcus like he was her savior, her prize. Lucas stood frozen on the sidewalk. Passers-by bumped into him, grumbling, but he didn't feel them. He was analyzing the scene before him like a catastrophic market crash. The assets were gone. The partnership was dissolved. The leverage was entirely on the other side. He didn't storm across the street. He didn't make a scene. That was for men who still had something to lose. Lucas watched the revolving doors spin them away into the golden warmth of the lobby, leaving him out in the cold. He turned around and walked toward the subway station. The audit was complete. The company was insolvent. Now it was time to liquidate. Evelyn returned shortly after 2 in the morning. Lucas was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling where a water stain had shaped itself into a jagged map of an unknown country. He heard her keys fumble in the lock, the soft click of the deadbolt, and the sigh of relief she exhaled as she kicked off her heels in the hallway. She entered the bedroom smelling of expensive champagne and Marcus Hale's cologne, a musk of sandalwood and arrogance that clung to her hair. "You're awake," she whispered, stripping off the midnight blue dress. "Just thinking," Lucas said. He didn't turn to face her. "How was the gala?" "Exhausting," Evelyn lied effortlessly. She slipped into bed, pulling the duvet tight around her shoulders. The donors were stingy, the food was cold, and my feet are killing me. I'm just glad to be home. She reached out, her hand brushing his shoulder in a perfunctory gesture of intimacy. It was a muscle memory, devoid of warmth. Lucas lay perfectly still, his heart beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. He wondered how she could lie so easily in the dark, how she could sleep beside him while the ghost of another man was still warm on her skin. "Go to sleep, Evie," he said softly. Good night, Lucas." She fell asleep within minutes. Lucas didn't close his eyes. He spent the remaining hours of the night memorizing the sound of her breathing, cataloging it alongside the other losses in his life. It was the final audit. Morning came with the gray, washed-out light of a rainy New York Tuesday. Evelyn rushed through her routine, coffee in a travel mug, concealer to hide the late night, a quick check of her phone. "I'm going to be late," she called out from the door, adjusting her coat. "Don't forget to call the landlord about the heat. And Lucas, try to get some rest today. You look terrible." "I will," Lucas said. He was standing in the kitchen, holding his mug. "Goodbye, Evelyn." She paused, hand on the doorknob, perhaps sensing the finality in his tone. But her phone buzzed, and the moment shattered. She glanced at the screen, smiled a small, private smile, and opened the door. "Bye." The latch clicked. Lucas didn't move for a long time. Then, he poured the rest of his coffee down the sink and began to work. He didn't take much. 2 suits that were still decent, his laptop, his old leather satchel, and a photograph of his parents. Everything else, the furniture, the books, the clothes Evelyn had bought him out of pity, he left behind. They were sunk costs. He drove their rusted sedan to a cash-for-cars lot in Queens. The dealer, a man with grease under his fingernails, offered him $800. It was an insult, a fraction of the car's scrap value, but Lucas took it without negotiation. He needed liquidity, not value. He returned to the apartment one last time on foot. The emptiness of the rooms felt different now. It wasn't oppressive anymore. It was spacious. On the scarred kitchen table, Lucas arranged his exit. First, the divorce papers signed and dated in black ink. Second, his wedding band. The gold was scratched, dull from years of wear. He placed it squarely in the center of the papers. Third, the bank statement he had printed the night before. He hadn't written a letter. There were no accusations, no tearful goodbyes. He simply took a red marker and circled the transaction for Voucher & Co. $4,000. Next to it, he circled the account balance. $0. The message was clear. The account was closed. Lucas picked up his bag and walked out the door. He didn't lock it. He dropped the keys through the mail slot, listening to them hit the floor with a metallic clatter. He walked 5 blocks to the subway, descending into the underground. He took the E-train to Port Authority, blending into the crowd of tourists and commuters. As the bus to Ohio pulled out of the terminal, Lucas watched the New York skyline retreat through the rain-streaked window. The Empire State Building, the Chrysler, the towering monuments to money and power, they all faded into the gray mist. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of diesel and rain. For the first time in years, he felt light. He was nothing. He was no one. And that meant he was free to become something else entirely. Time in New York moved in a blur of galas, headlines, and seasonal collections. But for Evelyn, the last 4 years had felt like a slow suffocation under a blanket of velvet. She stood on the balcony of Marcus Hale's triplex penthouse, clutching a glass of Chardonnay that had grown warm in her hand. Inside, the party was in full swing. The laughter was loud, brittle, and entirely performative. Marcus was holding court near the fireplace, his arm draped casually around a 22-year-old model who was hanging on his every word. Evelyn watched them through the glass, a familiar ache settling in her chest. In the beginning, she had told herself it was just Marcus's way. He was a powerful man. He needed to charm people. But the people were always women, and the charm often lasted until the early hours of the morning when he would stumble into bed, smelling of other perfumes. She looked down at her hand. No ring. Marcus didn't believe in labels, he had said. He believed in momentary connections. She had traded Lucas's scratched gold band and unshakable loyalty for a diamond bracelet and nights spent wondering if she was being replaced. "You look like a tragic painting," a voice drawled from the doorway. It was one of Marcus's associates, a man whose name she never bothered to remember. "Marcus is asking for the reserve scotch. The 1965. He knows where it is," Evelyn said, her voice flat. "He prefers when you pour it, darling. It adds a touch of domesticity." Evelyn closed her eyes for a second, swallowing the bile rising in her throat. She wasn't a partner here. She wasn't even a girlfriend. She was part of the interior design, something to be shown off when useful and dusted aside when boring. She turned back to the window, looking out at the city lights, remembering a rainy night 4 years ago and a set of keys lying on a cheap linoleum floor. She wondered, not for the first time, if Lucas was even alive. 10,000 miles away, the rain in Singapore was warm and relentless, hammering against the glass walls of a skyscraper in the Marina Bay Financial Center. The office of Quantum Capital was silent, save for the hum of high-frequency trading servers cooling in the back room. It was 3 a.m., but Lucas Thorne was wide awake. He stood before a wall of monitors, his reflection ghosting over the waterfalls of data cascading down the screens. He looked different. The soft edges of his face had been chiseled away by exhaustion and resolve. His hair was shorter, sharper. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, not because he had a meeting, but because he had adopted a uniform of discipline. "The algorithm is stabilizing, sir," a young analyst said, stepping tentatively into the room. "We've hit the target yield on the Asian markets. The liquidity pool is ready." Lucas didn't turn around. He was fixated on a specific sector of the U.S. market displayed on the center screen: luxury retail and precious metals. Specifically, a conglomerate named Aureus Holdings, the parent company of the jewelry brand where Evelyn worked. "And the acquisition vehicle?" Lucas asked, his voice low and devoid of inflection. "Shell companies represent 30% ownership. If we trigger the buy orders tomorrow, we cross the 51% threshold before the opening bell in New York." Lucas finally turned. His eyes were hard, the color of a stormy sea. There was no joy in them, only the cold satisfaction of a complex equation finally balancing out. "Not tomorrow," Lucas said. "Wait for their quarterly earnings report on Friday. I want the stock to dip. I want them desperate." "That's ruthless, sir." "That's business," Lucas corrected. He walked back to his desk, picking up a tablet. He pulled up a photo of the New York skyline, zooming in on the district where he used to be a nobody. For 4 years, he had been a ghost, a machine that turned coffee and resentment into capital. He had stripped away every part of himself that was capable of being hurt. Lucas, the husband, was dead. Lucas, the architect of ruin, was just getting started. "Prepare the jet," Lucas said, swiping the screen dark. "We're going back to New York." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was vibrating with the kind of nervous energy that only money could generate. The air smelled of expensive lilies and fear. Rumors had been circulating all week about the hostile takeover of Aureus Holdings, but the identity of the acquiring firm, Quantum Capital, remained a black box. Evelyn stood near a pillar of white marble, smoothing the fabric of her dress for the 10th time. Her palms were damp. As the PR director, she had spent the last 48 hours drafting press releases for a boss she had never met, trying to spin a corporate execution into a strategic partnership. "Stop fidgeting," Marcus muttered, taking a sip of his scotch. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were scanning the room, hunting for leverage. "You're making me look nervous, and I am never nervous." "I'm worried about the layoffs, Marcus," Evelyn whispered tight-lipped. "If the new board decides to restructure, I could be out. My department is redundant." "Then you'll find something else." Marcus dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "Or maybe you'll finally have time to learn how to cook something other than reservations." Evelyn bit the inside of her cheek, tasting copper. She wanted to scream, but she smiled instead, a reflex honed by 4 years of walking on eggshells. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. The murmuring crowd fell silent as the outgoing CEO of Aureus stepped up to the microphone. He looked tired, a captain surrendering his ship. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing slightly, "change is the only constant in our industry. Tonight, it is my privilege to introduce the vision behind our future. The founder of Quantum Capital and the new chairman of the board." The double doors at the back of the room swung open. A hush swept through the ballroom, moving like a wave from the entrance to the stage. A man walked in, flanked by two assistants who struggled to keep pace with his long, purposeful strides. He wore a suit cut from midnight blue wool that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. He didn't look at the floor. He didn't look at the cameras flashing in his periphery. He walked with the lethal grace of a predator entering a clearing. Evelyn squinted through the glare of the spotlights. There was something familiar about the set of his shoulders. Something about the way he didn't swing his arms unnecessarily. As he stepped into the pool of light on the stage, the room gasped collectively, but Evelyn forgot how to breathe entirely. It was Lucas, but it wasn't her Lucas. The man standing on the podium had erased every trace of the gentle, defeated husband she had discarded. His face was leaner, the jawline sharp enough to cut glass. His hair was styled with severe precision. But it was his eyes that terrified her. They swept over the crowd with a terrifying, clinical detachment. "Thank you," Lucas said. His voice was deeper, resonant, stripping the air of oxygen. "For too long, Aureus has relied on legacy rather than value. That ends tonight." Evelyn felt the champagne flute slip from her fingers. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, spilling liquid onto her shoes, but she didn't move. She couldn't feel her legs. "That's him?" Marcus whispered, impressed. "He looks like he could buy and sell this whole room before breakfast. I need an introduction." Lucas finished his brief speech, no jokes, no warmth, just directives. He descended the stairs, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. He moved straight toward the VIP section where the board members and Marcus were standing. He stopped 3 feet away. Marcus stepped forward, extending a hand, his charm turned up to maximum voltage. "Mr. Chairman, Marcus Hale, Hale Properties. Pleasure to welcome you to New York. I'm a significant investor in..." Lucas didn't take the hand. He looked at Marcus's outstretched palm for a second, then raised his eyes to Marcus's face. The dismissal was absolute. Then his gaze shifted. He looked at Evelyn. Time seemed to warp. Evelyn waited for the anger. She waited for the accusation, the smirk, the recognition. She waited for him to scream at her for what she had done. But Lucas just looked at her. His expression didn't change. It was blank. It was the look one gives to a piece of office furniture that is slightly out of place. He looked at her as if he had never seen her before in his life, and as if she didn't matter enough to be remembered. "Excuse me," Lucas said, his voice smooth and cold. "You're blocking the path." He stepped around them, the wake of his cologne, clean, sharp, icy, washing over Evelyn like a freezing tide. He walked away, leaving her standing in a puddle of spilled champagne, trembling next to the man she had ruined her life for, while the man she had ruined owned the very ground she stood on. Monday morning arrived with the weight of a sentencing hearing. The glass headquarters of Aureus Holdings felt different. The air conditioning seemed colder, the hallways quieter. Every employee walked with their head down, avoiding eye contact, terrified of the new management's axe. Evelyn stood in the elevator, clutching a letter of resignation in her trembling hand. She couldn't do this. She couldn't work for him. She couldn't sit in meetings and pretend that the man at the head of the table hadn't once held her hair back while she was sick, or that she hadn't betrayed him for a life that was currently crumbling around her. The elevator doors pinged open on the executive floor. "Miss Thorne," a sharp voice greeted her. It was Lucas's new executive assistant, a woman with efficiency woven into her DNA. "Mr. Thorne is expecting you. Conference room B." I actually just came to drop this off with HR," Evelyn stammered, holding up the envelope. "Mr. Thorne insisted on seeing you first. He said it concerns the restructuring of the public relations department. Evelyn swallowed hard. She walked down the long corridor, her heels clicking on the marble like a countdown. She pushed open the heavy glass doors. Lucas was alone in the room, standing by the window looking out at the city he now owned a significant piece of. He didn't turn when she entered. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a request. Evelyn sat. She placed the resignation letter on the mahogany table and slid it toward him. "Lucas, I can't stay. I'm resigning. Effective immediately." Lucas finally turned. He glanced at the envelope, then at her, his expression bored. He picked up a file from the table and opened it. "Read Clause 14B of your employment contract, Evelyn," he said, tapping the paper. "Executive officers require a 6-month notice period during a merger to ensure continuity. If you leave now, you forfeit your severance, your stock options, and you trigger a non-compete clause that bars you from working in luxury retail for 2 years. Can you afford that?" Evelyn froze. She knew he was right. She had signed that contract years ago, never imagining this scenario. "What do you want?" She whispered. "I want competence," Lucas said, sitting down opposite her. "We are renegotiating our commercial leases, specifically the flagship stores located in Hale Properties buildings. Since you have a personal relationship with the landlord, you are now the lead negotiator." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. "You want me to negotiate against Marcus?" "I want you to get the best deal for my company," Lucas corrected, his eyes hard as flint. "If you can't separate your personal life from your professional duties, then perhaps you really are as useless as your portfolio suggests." The meeting lasted 10 minutes. It was a masterclass in humiliation. Lucas was polite, professional, and utterly distant. He handed her a file of demands that would essentially bankrupt Marcus's rental income, and dismissed her with a wave of his hand. That evening, Evelyn returned to the penthouse she shared with Marcus. The atmosphere was toxic. Marcus was pacing the living room, a phone pressed to his ear, shouting at his broker. "What do you mean the liquidity is drying up? Sell the bonds. I need cash to cover the margin." He slammed the phone down onto the sofa as Evelyn walked in. "Where have you been?" Marcus snapped, his face flushed with stress and scotch. "Do you know what your ex-husband is doing? He's freezing me out. He's dumping real estate stocks to drive down the market value of my portfolio. He made me the lead on the lease renegotiations," Evelyn admitted quietly, dropping her bag on the floor. "He wants to cut the rent by 40%, Marcus. Or he pulls the stores." Marcus laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He walked over to her, looming close. For the first time, Evelyn saw violence in his eyes. "And you agreed? You let him do this to me?" "I didn't have a choice. He has me under contract." "You always have a choice, Evelyn," Marcus yelled, grabbing her arm. His grip was tight, painful. "Fix this. Go back to him. Bat your eyelashes, cry, beg. Do whatever you used to do to keep him wrapped around your finger. Because if I go down, you're on the street. Do you understand? You're nothing without me." He shoved her away and stormed out onto the terrace. Evelyn stood in the middle of the room, rubbing the red marks forming on her arm. She looked around the opulent cage she had fought so hard to enter. She had left a man who would have walked through fire for her, only to end up with a man who was ready to throw her into the flames to save himself. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Lucas wasn't just destroying Marcus's business. He was showing her exactly what she had bought with her betrayal. The end of Marcus Hale's empire didn't come with a bang, but with a relentless, buzzing silence. It was 11 a.m. on a Tuesday when the margin call finally came. The market had corrected violently, driven by Quantum Capital's strategic short-selling of commercial real estate bonds. Marcus's leverage, once his greatest weapon, had snapped back to decapitate him. Evelyn watched from the doorway of the study as Marcus slumped into his leather chair. The phone receiver dangled from his hand, the cord swinging like a pendulum counting down the seconds of their life together. "They're calling the loans," Marcus whispered, his face ashen. "Everything. The buildings, the car, this apartment. They want it all by Friday. He looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot and wild. The charm was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was a desperate, cornered animal. You have to go to him, Marcus said, his voice cracking. What? Evelyn took a step back. Lucas. He's the one doing this. He's the majority holder of the debt now. Go to him. Beg him for an extension. Tell him you still love him. Tell him whatever he needs to hear to stop the bleeding. Marcus, I can't, Evelyn said, tears pricking her eyes. He hates me. He won't listen. He doesn't hate you, Marcus screamed, throwing a crystal paperweight across the room. It shattered against the wall, shards of glass raining down like ice. Hate is passion. He's indifferent, which means you can still manipulate him if you try hard enough. Do you want to be homeless, Evelyn? Do you want to go back to that basement in Queens? Because that's where we are headed. Driven by fear and the crushing reality of destitution, Evelyn found herself standing outside the double mahogany doors of the CEO's office at 9 p.m. The building was empty, save for the cleaning crew and the man inside. She knocked. Enter. Lucas was sitting behind his desk, illuminated only by the glow of his monitors and the city lights outside. He didn't look up as she entered. He was reviewing a spreadsheet, his finger tracing a line of data. I didn't schedule a meeting, he said calmly. It's not business, Evelyn said, her voice trembling. She walked closer, the distance between the door and his desk feeling like a mile. Lucas, please, you have to stop. Lucas finally stopped typing. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since his return. He saw the fraying seams of her composure, the fear in her eyes, the desperation that made her look older than her years. Stop what? Evelyn? Winning? You're destroying him. You're destroying us, she pleaded. She reached out, placing her hands on the edge of his desk, leaning in. I know you're angry. I know I hurt you. But this cruelty isn't you. This isn't the man I married. You're right, Lucas said, his voice dangerously soft. The man you married was a bad investment. He yielded low returns. He had no liquidity. So you divested. You sold your shares and moved on to a higher performing asset. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the streets where he had once walked in the rain with a bag of clothes and a broken heart. I made a mistake, Lucas. Evelyn sobbed, the dam finally breaking. I was stupid. I was scared of being poor. I'm sorry. I miss you. I miss who we were. Lucas turned around. His face was a mask of stone. No, Evelyn. You don't miss me. You miss the security I now represent. You aren't sorry you left. You're sorry you bet on the wrong horse. He walked back to the desk and picked up a file. In finance, we call it seller's remorse. You sold at the bottom of the market, and now that the stock has rallied, you want to buy back in at the old price. But that's not how the market works. I'm not talking about money, she cried. Aren't you? Lucas asked. If I were still working in that warehouse, freezing in that basement, would you be here tonight begging for forgiveness? Or would you be at a gala with Marcus, laughing at the poor fools who couldn't pay their heating bills? The question hung in the air, absolute and unanswerable. Evelyn opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She couldn't lie. Not to him. Not anymore. Go home, Evelyn, Lucas said, sitting back down and turning his attention to the screen. There is no extension. The margin call is due. Tell Marcus to start packing. By Friday, the collapse of Marcus Hale was headline news. The Wall Street Journal called it a correction. But to those watching closely, it was an evisceration. The penthouse was seized by the bank at noon. Marcus didn't wait for the marshals. He took the last flight to the Caymans with a suitcase of cash and didn't leave a forwarding address for Evelyn. Evelyn packed her belongings into 2 cardboard boxes. It was a poetic symmetry she couldn't ignore. 4 years ago, Lucas had left with a satchel. Now, she was leaving with boxes. The difference was that Lucas had left with his dignity intact. She didn't have anywhere to go. The friend she had made during her time as Marcus's girlfriend, had stopped returning her texts the moment the credit cards were declined. Her phone rang. It was the executive assistant at Quantum Capital. "Mr. Thorne has prepared your severance package. He expects you in his office at 4 p.m. to sign the final release forms." Evelyn arrived 10 minutes early. The office was bustling with the chaotic energy of the market close. Traders were shouting orders, phones were ringing, and the digital tickers on the walls were flashing green and red. It was the heartbeat of the world Lucas now ruled. She entered his office. It was quiet, insulated from the madness outside by thick soundproof glass. Lucas stood by the window, watching the sun dip below the Hudson River. He turned when she entered, his face unreadable. "Marcus is gone," Evelyn said, her voice hollow. It wasn't a question. "I know," Lucas replied. "His flight landed an hour ago. He'll be safe there, provided he doesn't try to spend money he doesn't have." He gestured to the chair. On the desk lay a single folder. "Your termination papers," Lucas said. "Standard procedure. 2 weeks severance. A neutral reference." Evelyn reached for the pen, her hand trembling. This was it. She was 30 years old, divorced, homeless, and unemployed in the most expensive city on earth. However, Lucas interrupted before the pen touched the paper. "There is an alternative." Evelyn looked up, hope flaring in her chest. "A dangerous, desperate thing." "We are opening a logistics hub in Ohio," Lucas said, his tone devoid of emotion. "It's not glamorous. It's a warehouse district. We need an entry-level coordinator to manage inventory logs. The pay is minimum wage. The hours are overnight. It's cold, it's loud, and nobody there cares what brand of shoes you wear." He slid a second document across the desk. "It's the exact job I had when you left me, Evelyn. The exact salary. The exact hours." Evelyn stared at the paper. It was a test. It was a punishment. But it was also a lifeline. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you need to learn the value of $1, Lucas said, leaning back. "You've spent your whole life climbing on the backs of men you thought could carry you. Marcus dropped you. I dropped you. It's time you learned to walk." Tears spilled onto her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She looked at the termination papers, then at the job offer. She thought about the cold apartment in Queens. She thought about the radiator that hissed. She remembered how Lucas had sat at that table, night after night, trying to build a future for them. She hadn't understood his strength then. She understood it now. Slowly, Evelyn pushed the termination papers aside. She pulled the job offer closer. She signed her name on the dotted line. "I'll take it," she said softly. "Report to HR. You start Monday," Lucas said, already turning back to his screens. "Goodbye, Evelyn." She stood up. She wanted to say something else. "Thank you. I'm sorry, I love you." But the words died in her throat. Those currencies had no value here. She turned and walked out of the office, closing the heavy door behind her. Lucas didn't watch her go. He watched the digital clock on the wall. 3:59 and 50 seconds p.m. 10 seconds to market close. He had balanced the ledger. The debt was paid. The toxicity was liquidated. He felt a lightness in his chest that he hadn't felt in 5 years. The anger that had fueled his rise was gone, replaced by a quiet, expansive peace. 4 p.m. The bell rang out across the trading floor. A sharp, clear sound signaling the end of the day. Lucas reached out and pressed the power button on his monitor. The screen went black. The reflection staring back at him wasn't a victim, or a ghost, or a vengeful god. It was just a man who was finally free to go home.